We're going to move to this session on major demographic trends. I'd like to welcome Dr. Jim Johnson. It's a pleasure being with you. I've been fortunate to be with the professor on many occasions, and actually he's going to be coming to Digital CPA this year. And what we're doing on today's town hall is just kind of highlighting some of his research, which is very important from a business standpoint. And the white paper that you wrote a while back that kind of helps drive a lot of these slides, you stated that, gale force demographic wind gusts ahead, business alert. I'm a sailor, and when gale force winds are ahead, you definitely need to get prepared. So
right.
Thanks for being here today, and looking forward to this session.
Thank you so much, Eric, for having me. When you're on that sailboat, given the disruptive trends we find ourselves in the midst of, buckle your seatbelt, because that is what you need to do in the world of business, given the kinds of disruptive demographic changes we find ourselves in the midst of. If we can move forward on the slides.
And we might say batten down your hatches.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. When we were on lockdown, the Census Bureau released two important sources of information. They released the 2020 census. Every 10 years, we do a full enumeration account for our population. They released that. And then most recently, they released post-2020 population estimates for the first 27 months of the new decade. That's the first 27 months that we lived through a pandemic. And you ask the question, what and how did we behave during the pandemic? I've taken those seven forces and reduced them to three buckets. I'm going to get through them pretty quickly. During the pandemic, our population was moving and grooving. It was browning and graying, and it was disappearing and rebelling. If we move to the next slide, that moving and grooving was about the profound redistribution of our population during the pandemic. Everybody thought we were at home on lockdown. In reality, we were a very highly mobile population. And the bottom line was that the South grew by 2.5 million people during the first 27 months of the pandemic. That is the continuation of a trend that actually started in the late 1970s, profound redistribution of population from the Northeast and the Midwest to the South. The West grew a little bit, but it was all because of an increase of births over deaths. The West was a net exporter out as well. If we have the next slide, what you will see is how many people were engaged in this process. Florida got 985 people every day, 7 days a week for the first 27 months of this decade. Texas got 789 people every day. North Carolina, here where I live, we got 307 people every day. If you go down that list, this movement was about North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, Florida, Georgia, and Tennessee in the South, and Arizona in the west part of the region. Where were the people coming from? California lost about 860 odd people every day. New York lost 687 people every day. Illinois, 294 people every day. You go down the list, a profound kind of redistribution of population that had both good things and bad things with it. The good part was, the movement to the South and other regions brought, enormous economic growth and development to those regions, but it also created a huge housing affordability crisis for us, that many people got priced out of the housing market. And many of them work for us every day that cannot no longer afford to live in the places that they work. Here where we are in Durham, North Carolina, I have a school for vulnerable children. I had 4 homeless teachers, all with master's degrees, but they can't afford to live in the city because the price of housing has become so outrageous in the place. And so we have some both good things, strong economic benefits for this, but also we have to look after the very people who are hired to protect public health and safety and educate our kids, school teachers, police officers, EMS workers, and the like that are getting priced out of these markets. The next slide.
Jim, just before we move to the next slide, because I've heard you provide these presentations even before the pandemic,
Mhm.
So when you look at the data, it's staggering. As you said, the growth in Florida, Texas, North Carolina, and Arizona, and then the shrinking of California, New York, and Illinois. Did this accelerate a lot during the pandemic, compared to prior to the pandemic?
Very good question, Eric. So I'll just use North Carolina. For the past decade prior to the pandemic, North Carolina got about 150 people every day. During the pandemic, it went to 307 people every day, to give you some sense of the magnitude of the change.
Wow.
At the same time that we had this profound redistribution of population, we had a change in the composition of the population, what I call the browning of America. And that's all about immigration-driven population change. But there was a profound, unprecedented shift in our population in the previous decade that is undergirding this browning of America. And that unprecedented change was a 5.1 million decline in the non-Hispanic white population. So we grew by 22.7 million people during the last decade. All of that growth was due to people of color. And during the pandemic, as you can see in this slide, the non-Hispanic white population dropped by another 1.6 million people. So if we added 1.8 million people to our population, all of it was driven by people of color, particularly Hispanics, but particularly people of Asian descent, and particularly people of mixed race categories, because we've also seen this increase in outmarriage or intermarriage that is transforming the complexion of our society. So your workforce is going to be far more diverse moving forward, given these kinds of profound changes in the composition of our population. Next slide. And we're also aging at the same time. That's the graying piece. Now, you might ask, well, how do you know if you're part of the graying of America? Well, if you have difficulty seeing this screen, you're part of the graying of America. And so if you got to go to the restroom 3 times during this presentation, you're part of the graying of America. But the graying of America is about the aging of a group of us who were born between 1946 and 1964. We're the boomer generation. On January 1st of 2011, the first baby boomer turned 65 and became eligible for basically everything. But every day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year, between 2011 and 2029, we boomers are turning 65 at the rate of 10,000 per day. That's the silver tsunami. That's the huge wave of people who will be exiting the labor market. You can see the impact in the graphic here of the first 27 months of the new decade, where the most rapidly growing population was the 65 plus population, going at 5.9%. You see a loss in the 18 to 64 age category and a loss among the under 18, because part of what graying is driving graying is declining fertility. We've had the below replacement level fertility in America since 2008. And so when you're not adding on the front end of the life course, the top end of the life course gets older, and we have extended longevity, because that person turning 65 today is going to live another 18.7 years. We don't die, we just multiply. Next slide. And we also are seeing a profound shift in the composition of higher education. The sex ratio in higher education has been 60% female, 40% male for about 3 decades now. And you see the history of it and how it develops in the left-hand side of this graphic. We granted something like 59,000 more degrees to women than we did men in the UNC system in the last 5 years. It's this profound shift that is going to be manifested in the workforce moving forward. It is going to be far more women in the workforce than men, because we have a whole generation of men that have given up on college and just not attending. They are not even engaged in the academic process, and it has enormous implications for us moving forward. But this sex ratio imbalance has implications for marriage. It has implications for dual learner households. There are a whole range of implications there that we don't have time to get into today, but that is a major kind of disruptive trend. Next slide.
Jim, I got a couple questions I'm going to just bring to you.
Sure.
One is on the declining white population, the drivers there, and then also the influence of just retirees to the growth in the South.
Yeah. So we have I was going to talk about it a little bit, but I'll just mention it now. there is this profound growth and increase in deaths of despair among prime working age males that are with less than a college education. And it's having a profound impact in our society. And at the same time, you have sort of inequities, health inequities that are snuffing out the life of certain individuals, or these premature deaths, and the normal aging process of normal aging leading to death. All of those things are coming together. The boomer population is 70 odd percent white. So you're going to get those deaths in that group. Whereas, the Gen Z is about 48% non-white. And so we find ourselves in this situation where there are these gale force demographic wind gusts that we have to deal with. I'll run through them really quickly. We're in an era of slowing total growth, slowing foreign population growth, that white population decline that I've just talked about. We have declining fertility worldwide, and these deaths of despair. And all of that translates to the declining labor force participation in our economy. And you'll see it in the next slide, next couple of slides. If you look at the left-hand side of this graphic, what you will see is that in the last decade, we had the second slowest rate of growth in the history of our country, where we grew by 7.4%. The slowest rate of growth was in the 1940s during the Great Depression, where we grew by 7.3%. Our growth rate peaked in 1960, and it has been declining ever since. And you'll look at the right-hand side of this graphic, where it is forecast that we will continue to experiencing slow population growth moving forward. Next slide. And you see it in the labor market today. And this is why we have such huge challenges. You see those red bars, both in terms of the composition of the population and the workforce. The young population is declining. The most rapidly growing age groups in our workforce are the 55 or older population. We have a serious cliff coming to us in terms of the people who have to propel our nation moving forward because of declining fertility and because of these deaths of despair and things of that nature. If you think we have labor force challenges now, you haven't seen anything. It's just the beginning of a real challenge moving forward. Because we're losing so many prime working age young people, and we just had declining fertility. Next slide.
And just on a couple of questions on deaths of despair, and I've seen more of your slides, and that's due to some of the overdoses,
yeah,
suicides.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, with all of these big developments, how do you win the war on talent? Well, there's some recruitment strategies I think you have to pursue. One, I think in this climate and given the disruptive demographic changes, you're going to have to grow your own pipeline. You're going to have to figure out how do you develop relationships with people at a very, very young age and nurture and grow them all the way to your organizations, your firms. And I think you got to look for talent in places that no one else is looking for it. And I think these encore career strategies are important. We have this large boomer population, a lot of people who thought they were going to play golf every day, and now they're bored as bat doo-doo. They want back into the workforce, and we need them given the kinds of changes that we find ourselves in. So this notion of encore careers is very, very important. And in places and markets where you have major labor challenges, you got to have place-based incentives to encourage people to come there and to work for you. That's recruitment. The next slide is how do you retain the workforce that you have? I think in this climate, we talk a lot about iceberg demographics, not about what you see. The iceberg, the 30% that you see would be the equivalent of race and gender and things of that nature. But it's all the things that you don't see that are critical to creating a highly attractive workforce where everybody feels like they belong, and looking for all of the ties that bind us together. You wouldn't know that I lost 10 family members in the last decade just looking at me. That's an iceberg consideration. And I guarantee you there are people on this, town hall that have lost loved ones and the like, or and so looking for these communalities, these ties that bind, is going to be crucial moving forward. And you got to recognize that retirement is outdated because people are living much longer. So the notion of the retirement age is going to change. So you have to develop a longevity mindset in this process, creating rotational programs for older workers. And 75 to 80% of women at work today uh, are menopausal. Those are kinds of changes that require workers, if you're going to retain women, to be menopausal friendly. That's a big thing moving forward, particularly given the gender shifts in the workplace. Next slide.
Well, I think that brings us to the end here of your section. So just fantastic. I mean, I know the audience just loved this summary. I mean, I've been with you on a number of occasions. You usually are with us for an hour, and what you just did in 12 minutes for us was fantastic.
Sure.
Comments here, just a couple, immigration policy, technology, just hit those two, and then we'll wrap up.
We have to realize that, Eric, as you well know, that immigration is an age selective process. Far more young people immigrate and migrate than older people. That means old people don't move, they move slower and at a lower propensity than young people. And there's one more piece to this story that's very, very important for our future. I don't want to repeat this anywhere, but young people are more likely to have children than old folks. And so the challenge for us and the opportunity that we have is to come up with a sane immigration policy that will allow us to embrace the talent, because it's an age selective process. Immigrants are far more entrepreneurial than we are. And so we benefit, our nation has benefited. We were built on that pillar. And so
Right.
we need to have these conversations. We need to be promoting immigration friendly policies, including place-based visas for communities that aren't growing rapidly at present time.
And then AI, that's something we'll be talking a lot about at Digital CPA, just technology, automation. But one thing we see is everyone, the technology will help with productivity, but it's probably going to just produce, more opportunities and more work. But it will be a way to augment, lack of staff in some areas.
Yeah, that's part of the problem that we have, Eric, is with AI, and when people, if you displace a lot of workers, who's going to buy your goods and services?
Mm-hmm.
So when you start thinking about AI, we got to talk about socially responsible AI in a way that we have a workforce that gets paid every day and has a discretionary income to go for a ride with you on your boat.
All right, so the rides on the boat are free, but we will.
They
Thank
got
you.
to get there.
That's right. Thank you very much for that session today, and look forward to having you with us at Digital CPA. And we've probably got 100 questions that came in today. We'll take a look at those. And as I said, we leverage our newsletter, and we'll also leverage these for our follow-up session in December.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.